I was never the type to suspect my wife of anything. I suppose that's why the betrayal cut so deep, why it felt like the ground beneath me opened up and swallowed me whole. My name is David, and for the past 8 years I've been married to Emma. We met through work, of all places. She was a marketing manager at a tech firm, and I was in charge of IT at a different company that partnered with hers. Our connection was instant, the kind that's undeniable even in a crowded room. We shared a passion for travel, fine dining, and, surprisingly enough, board games. It was a relationship that seemed built on solid ground, or at least I thought so. We settled into our life together fairly quickly. I was making good money, enough to afford a comfortable lifestyle without too much worry. Emma continued her career, climbing the corporate ladder with grace and determination. We were a team, or so I believed. There were no children to tie us down, just the two of us exploring the world at our own pace, indulging in life's pleasures. She often spoke of wanting to start a family, but it always seemed like something for the future, a distant plan that never quite made it to the forefront of our lives. In hindsight, I realized there were signs, little moments that should have set off alarms. But I was too busy with work, too wrapped up in our shared routines, to see what was right in front of me. Emma had always been a bit of a social butterfly, someone who thrived on attention and adoration. At parties, she would light up the room, effortlessly engaging with anyone and everyone. I admired her for it, loved that she was the life of the party, while I played the more reserved role. We balanced each other out, or so I told myself. Looking back, there were a few oddities that I dismissed far too easily. Emma had started going out more frequently, claiming she was meeting up with old friends or networking with colleagues. I trusted her implicitly, never once questioning her late-night outings. Sometimes she would come home smelling of a different cologne, but I figured it was just from the people she was around. I was secure in our marriage, in the life we had built together. But that security would be shattered soon enough. Emma was, by all accounts, the perfect wife. She was beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely independent. She had this way of making everyone around her feel important, of drawing people in with her charisma and charm. I often marveled at how lucky I was to have her by my side. Friends would comment on how we seemed like the ideal couple, the kind that others aspired to be. We traveled frequently, visiting exotic locations that most people only dream of. Paris, Tokyo, Bali. We had seen it all. And through it all, Emma was my partner in crime, the one person I could count on no matter what. Our life together was comfortable, almost too comfortable. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams. But I suppose comfort breeds complacency. I never questioned the status quo, never dug deeper when things didn't quite add up. Like the time I found a receipt for an expensive lingerie set in her purse, a set I had never seen her wear. When I asked her about it, she laughed it off, saying she bought it on a whim and decided it didn't suit her. I believed her, because why wouldn't I? There were other instances, of course. The mysterious phone calls she would take in the other room, the sudden interest in going to the gym late at night. She had always been fit, but this newfound dedication seemed a bit over the top. Again, I didn't question it. After all, she was my wife, and I loved her. Love, as it turns out, can be the perfect blindfold. But there was one moment that stands out in my memory, a moment that should have been a clear warning sign. It was about a month before everything came crashing down. We were planning a vacation, a much-needed getaway to recharge and reconnect. Emma was unusually excited about the trip, more so than usual. She kept talking about all the things we would do, the places we would see. And yet, there was a certain distance in her eyes, a detachment that I couldn't quite place. I brushed it off, telling myself that we were just going through a phase, that every marriage had its ups and downs. But that was just the calm before the storm, the moment of quiet before everything would change forever. The day of our vacation was finally upon us, and I was eager to get away. We had booked a luxurious resort in the Caribbean, a place known for its crystal-clear waters and pristine beaches. It was supposed to be the perfect escape, a time for us to reconnect and enjoy each other's company without the distractions of everyday life. I had even taken extra care in planning every detail, hoping to surprise Emma with little touches that would make the trip special. But something felt off that morning. Emma was unusually distant, her excitement from the weeks before replaced by a strange calm. She had always been the one to double-check everything, making sure we hadn't forgotten a single item. But this time, she barely glanced at the suitcase I packed, instead opting to scroll through her phone with an intensity that made me uneasy. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to mask the concern in my voice. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Yeah, just finishing up some work stuff. You know how it is." I nodded, though something in her tone made me feel like there was more to it than just work. But I didn't push. We had a flight to catch, and I wanted to start the trip on a positive note. On the way to the airport, Emma seemed lost in thought. I tried to make conversation, but she responded with little more than monosyllabic answers. My mind started to wander, thinking back to all those late nights, the gym sessions, the unexplained expenses. A nagging doubt began to creep in, but I shoved it down, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. After all, we were going on vacation, a vacation I'd worked hard to plan. This was supposed to be a time to relax, not to dwell on baseless fears. We made it through security, checked our bags, and found our way to the gate. As we sat there waiting for the boarding call, Emma excused herself to go to the restroom. She took her phone with her, something she rarely did, but again, I ignored it. Minutes passed, then 10, then 15. I started to get worried and was about to go check on her when she finally returned, her expression unreadable. "They're calling our zone," she said, almost mechanically. We boarded the plane, and I tried to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. We found our seats, and as we buckled in, Emma leaned her head back, closing her eyes as if she was already on the beach, miles away from the life we were leaving behind. It wasn't until we were high above the clouds, somewhere over the Atlantic, that I heard it. She was asleep, or so I thought, when her phone buzzed in the pocket of her seat. The screen lit up briefly, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of the message. "Can't wait to see you tonight, darling. Everything is ready. Love you." My blood ran cold. I couldn't believe what I had just read. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the phone, my mind racing to make sense of it. Who was this person? What did they mean by tonight? We were supposed to be going on vacation, together. I wanted to grab her phone, to read every message, to confront her right then and there. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the realization that everything I had believed about our marriage might have been a lie. Emma stirred slightly, shifting in her seat, and I quickly looked away, pretending to focus on the in-flight magazine. I could feel my hands trembling, the gravity of the situation sinking in. All those strange moments, the late nights, the gym trips, the lingerie, suddenly it all made sense. She was cheating on me, and not just any affair, but one so brazen that she was planning to meet him that very night, on the eve of what was supposed to be our romantic getaway. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been lying to me. I felt the sting of humiliation, the anger bubbling up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the time for a confrontation, not here, not now. I needed to keep my composure, to think about what I was going to do next. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't escape the truth. My wife was unfaithful, and everything was about to come crashing down. The rest of the flight felt like a slow descent into madness. My mind was a whirlpool of emotions: anger, betrayal, disbelief. I kept replaying the message I saw, the words searing into my memory. How could she do this to me? We were supposed to be in this together, building a life, a future. Yet, here I was, thousands of feet above the ocean, sitting next to a woman who was planning to meet another man while on vacation with her husband. I stole glances at Emma, who slept peacefully beside me, completely unaware of the storm raging inside my head. Her face was serene, as if she had nothing to worry about in the world. It made my blood boil. How long had this been going on? Who was this man she was meeting? The questions gnawed at me, each one cutting deeper than the last. I had to know more to understand the full scope of her betrayal. But I couldn't just confront her, not yet. I needed to keep my emotions in check, to think clearly. If I lashed out now, I'd lose any chance of finding out the truth. No, I had to be smart about this. I needed a plan. As we touched down in the Caribbean, the reality of what I had to do settled in. I would go along with the vacation as planned, playing the part of the unsuspecting husband. I would let her think she had me fooled, all while gathering the information I needed. The thought of playing. This game made me sick, but I had no choice. I needed to know who this man was and how far their relationship had gone. We arrived at the resort, a stunning paradise that only served to highlight the irony of our situation. The palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, the ocean sparkled in the distance, and the staff welcomed us with warm smiles and fruity drinks. It was everything a couple could want in a romantic getaway, but all I could think about was the message on her phone. As we settled into our suite, Emma seemed oblivious to the turmoil inside me. She unpacked her things with an almost cheerful demeanor, humming softly to herself as she arranged her clothes in the closet. I forced myself to smile, to act as though everything was fine, even though I felt like screaming. Once we were both unpacked, she suggested we head down to the beach. I agreed, needing the distraction to keep my mind from spiraling further. As we walked along the shoreline, the sun beginning its descent, I tried to make conversation, to keep things light. She responded in kind, but I could tell her mind was elsewhere. Probably with him, I thought bitterly. We found a quiet spot and laid out our towels. Emma stripped down to her swimsuit, looking every bit the stunning woman I had fallen in love with. It was hard to reconcile the image before me with the reality of what she had done. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything we shared was tainted, that nothing was as it seemed anymore. She suggested we go for a swim, and I agreed, though my heart wasn't in it. We waded into the warm water, letting the waves lap at our bodies. For a brief moment, I tried to pretend that everything was normal, that this was just another vacation with the woman I loved. But the illusion shattered the moment I saw her glance at the shore, a flicker of anticipation in her eyes that she quickly masked. That was when I knew for certain. She wasn't just thinking about him. She was planning to see him tonight. The thought made my stomach churn, but I kept my expression neutral. If she had any idea that I knew, she didn't show it. We swam for a while longer before heading back to our towels. Emma suggested we go back to the room to freshen up before dinner, and I agreed, though I knew it wasn't dinner she was looking forward to. As we made our way back to the suite, I started to devise a plan. I needed to catch her in the act, to see for myself just how deep this betrayal went. It wasn't enough to confront her with a text message. I needed proof, something undeniable that would shatter whatever lies she tried to spin. Back in the room, Emma took her time in the bathroom, no doubt getting ready for her secret rendezvous. I pretended to be preoccupied with my own things, but inside, I was watching her every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. When she finally emerged, looking effortlessly beautiful, she smiled at me and said, "I'm going to head down to the lounge for a bit before dinner, maybe grab a drink. You want to join me?" I shook my head, forcing a smile. "You go ahead. I'm going to finish up a few things here, and then I'll meet you down there." She seemed relieved, which only confirmed my suspicions. "Okay, see you in a bit," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek before leaving the room. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I sprang into action. I needed to find out where she was really going, and I needed to do it fast. My heart pounded as I grabbed her phone from the bedside table, my hands shaking as I scrolled through her messages, and then I saw it. The full conversation with her lover, detailing every sordid plan they had for that night. She had arranged to meet him at a bar not far from the resort, planning to slip away under the guise of needing some alone time. Rage bubbled up inside me, but I forced it down. This was no time for anger. I needed to keep my wits about me, to be calm and collected. I couldn't let her know I was on to her, not yet. I would follow her, watch her meet him, and then I would decide what to do. But one thing was certain. This was the beginning of the end. With her phone back in its place and my heart pounding like a war drum, I waited just a few minutes after Emma left before I followed her. My mind was racing, but I knew I had to stay focused. If I wanted to catch her in the act, I couldn't afford to let my emotions get the better of me. I slipped out of the room and made my way through the resort, keeping a careful distance. I spotted her just as she exited the lobby, heading down the path towards the bar. I trailed her, staying far enough back that she wouldn't notice me. The tropical night was warm, the air thick with the scent of flowers and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore. Under different circumstances, it might have been romantic, but tonight, it felt like a cruel joke. The bar was a cozy, dimly lit place nestled close to the beach, with an open-air layout that allowed the sea breeze to drift in. It wasn't crowded, just a few couples scattered around, enjoying their drinks and the soft murmur of conversation. I hung back, blending into the shadows as I watched her. She took a seat at the bar, ordered a drink, and then she waited. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the room, looking for her lover. I didn't know what he looked like, but I knew he would show up soon. Every second that passed felt like an eternity, the tension building as I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation. Then I saw him, a tall, handsome man with a confident stride. He walked in like he owned the place, his eyes scanning the bar until they locked onto Emma. A smirk played on his lips as he approached her, slipping onto the stool beside her like he had done it 100 times before. I watched, seething with anger, as Emma's face lit up at the sight of him. She smiled, that same smile that once made me feel like the luckiest man in the world, now twisted into something I couldn't recognize. They exchanged a few words, their bodies leaning in close, the intimacy between them unmistakable. It was as if they had done this countless times before, as if they had rehearsed this very moment. My hands clenched into fists, the urge to storm over there and confront them nearly overwhelming. But I stayed put, forcing myself to watch, to take it all in. This was the proof I needed, the confirmation of everything I had feared. There was no going back from this. As they continued to talk, Emma placed her hand on his arm, a casual touch that sent a jolt of fury through me. This was my wife, the woman I had promised to love and cherish, and here she was, touching another man like it was the most natural thing in the world. I could feel my control slipping, the anger bubbling up inside me, but I had to hold it together. Not here. Not yet. I watched as they finished their drinks, their conversation punctuated by laughter and stolen glances. They looked like any other couple, relaxed and comfortable in each other's presence. It was sickening, this display of affection between them. I wanted to scream, to tear this fantasy world they had created apart, but I forced myself to stay calm. There was still time to figure out my next move. Then, as if to seal the betrayal, Emma leaned in and whispered something in his ear. He smiled, a slow, predatory grin that made my skin crawl, and then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a quick, stolen kiss. It was passionate, deliberate, the kind of kiss that made it clear this wasn't just some casual fling. I could barely breathe, the reality of it all crashing down on me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a one-time thing. This was something deeper, something that had been going on for who knows how long. And it wasn't just about sex, though that alone would have been enough to break me. It was about the connection they shared, the intimacy that she had stolen from our marriage and given to him. I couldn't watch anymore. My vision blurred with a mix of rage and tears, and I turned away, retreating into the darkness. I stumbled down the path, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from the sight of them together. My mind was a mess, a chaotic jumble of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was clear. This was the end. I found myself back on the beach, the waves crashing against the shore in a rhythmic pattern that should have been soothing, but instead felt like a mockery of the storm inside me. I sank down onto the sand, my head in my hands, trying to process what had just happened. Everything I had known, everything I had believed in, was gone. My wife, the woman I had loved so deeply, had betrayed me in the worst possible way. And now, I had to decide what to do next. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Not after what I had seen, what I now knew. This marriage, this life we had built together, it was all a lie. And the worst part was, I had no idea how long it had been that way. The next few hours were a blur. I wandered the beach, the warm sand under my feet doing little to ground me in reality. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. How could I have been so blind? How long had she been lying to me? Questions with no answers, only an overwhelming sense of betrayal. When I finally returned to our suite, the lights were off, and the room was quiet. Emma hadn't come back yet, and the thought of where she was, of what she was doing, made me sick to my stomach. I knew I couldn't just sit here and wait for her, not after everything I'd seen. I needed to confront her, to hear her try to explain herself, to see if she would even bother to lie to my face. I sat on the edge of the bed, the minutes ticking by in agonizing silence. I don't know how long I waited, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, heartbreak, and the bitter sting of humiliation. But eventually the door clicked open, and Emma walked in. She looked surprised to see me sitting there, her expression quickly morphing into something that resembled concern. "David, you're still up? I thought you'd be asleep by now," she said, her voice light, as if nothing was wrong. I could barely contain the rage bubbling inside me. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. She paused just for a split second before flashing me a practiced smile. "I told you, I went down to the lounge for a drink. Needed some time to unwind." I stood up, taking a step closer to her. "Don't lie to me, Emma. I know you weren't just getting a drink." Her smile faltered, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "What are you talking about? Of course I was." "Don't," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "Don't insult me by pretending like you're innocent. I know, Emma. I know everything." She blinked, and I saw the mask of calm crack, just for a moment. But then she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defensively. "You're being ridiculous. You're tired and you're making something out of nothing." "Something out of nothing?" I echoed, incredulous. "I saw you, Emma. I followed you to the bar. I saw you with him." Her face went pale, the color draining away as my words sank in. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time, she looked genuinely shocked, as if she hadn't expected to be caught so easily. "Who is he?" I demanded, the anger rising to the surface. "How long has this been going on?" She took a step back, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "David, please, it's not what you think." "Not what I think," I interrupted, my voice harsh. "You were kissing him, Emma. Don't stand there and try to tell me it's not what I think." Her shoulders slumped, and I saw the fight drain out of her. She knew she couldn't talk her way out of this. "His name is Mark," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We met a few months ago, at the gym." The gym. All those late-night sessions, the sudden interest in working out. It all made sense now. I felt a fresh wave of anger surge through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "And what? You just decided that our marriage wasn't enough, So you went looking for someone else? It wasn't like that, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't mean for this to happen, David. I love you, I do. But things have been different between us. I felt like we were drifting apart, and then Mark came along and, Don't, I cut her off, my voice shaking. Don't you dare try to justify this. If there was a problem, you should have come to me, not run off to someone else. She wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept coming. I know I should have. But I was confused. I didn't know what to do. I never meant to hurt you, David. Please believe me. The sight of her crying, the sound of her voice pleading with me, it might have worked once, but not anymore. I was too hurt, too angry to be swayed by her tears. You didn't mean to hurt me? I echoed, my voice bitter. How did you think this was going to end, Emma? Did you really think you could keep this up forever? She didn't answer, just stood there, her face a picture of guilt and regret. For a moment, the silence was suffocating, the weight of what she had done hanging between us like a dark cloud. I trusted you, I said, the words heavy with the pain I felt. I loved you, Emma, and you threw it all away for what? Some fling with a guy you met at the gym? It wasn't just a fling, she whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't just a fling. Her words cut deep, a final twist of the knife in my back. I turned away, unable to look at her any longer. I can't do this anymore, I said, my voice hollow. I can't be with someone who would betray me like this. David, please, she begged, reaching out to touch my arm, but I pulled away. We can work through this. We can fix this. I know we can. I shook my head, my heart breaking even as I said the words, No, Emma, you've already made your choice. The finality of it hung in the air, the reality of what was happening settling in for both of us. She didn't try to argue anymore, didn't try to convince me otherwise. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face as I turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the life we had built together. As I stepped out into the night, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, I knew there was no going back. This was the end of our marriage, the end of everything we had once been, and all that was left now was the wreckage. I wandered the resort in a daze, the reality of what had just happened crashing down on me like a wave. I had left Emma standing there, alone in our suite, her tears barely making a dent in the armor I had built around myself in those last few hours. The sun had set, and the once idyllic surroundings now felt cold and empty, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I ended up at the beach again, the one place that had offered any sense of solace earlier. The resort was quiet, most of the guests having retreated to their rooms or the bars for the night. I found a secluded spot, away from the lights, and sank down into the sand. The waves lapped at the shore, their rhythmic sound almost mocking in its consistency, as if the world continued turning, indifferent to the destruction of my life. Sitting there, I tried to process everything. My marriage was over. The life I had known was gone, shattered by the person I had trusted most. The future I had envisioned, growing old together, starting a family, all of it, had been ripped away, leaving me with nothing but a void where those dreams used to be. My thoughts turned bitter, angry. How long had she been planning this? How many times had she met him while I was blissfully unaware, thinking she was just working late or catching up with friends? Every memory I had of our time together was now tainted, every shared moment laced with the knowledge that she had been lying to me, cheating on me. The love we had built our marriage on had been eroded away, bit by bit, until there was nothing left. I pulled out my phone, the screen lighting up in the darkness. I had no messages, no missed calls. Emma hadn't tried to reach out, to apologize again, or beg for another chance. Maybe she knew it was useless. that nothing she could say would change what had happened. Or maybe she was with him now, finding comfort in the arms of the man she had chosen over me. The thought made me feel sick. I threw my phone aside, not caring where it landed. It was all too much. The betrayal, the lies, the end of everything I had held dear. I felt like I was drowning in it, unable to breathe, unable to find a way out. And then, amid the chaos of my thoughts, came a new feeling, a cold, hard determination. I couldn't just sit here and wallow in my misery. I needed to do something, to take control of my life again. Emma had taken everything from me, but I wasn't going to let her keep it. I wasn't going to be the victim. The first step was clear. I needed to end this marriage, officially, legally. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of dragging this out, of making it messy or complicated. I would file for divorce the moment we got back home, cut all ties, and move on. She didn't deserve any more of my time, my energy, or my love. The thought gave me a strange sense of peace, a sliver of hope in the darkness. It wouldn't be easy, I knew that, but it was the only way forward. I couldn't stay in this marriage, couldn't live with the constant reminder of what she had done. The only way to heal, to rebuild my life, was to let her go completely. I stayed on the beach for hours, lost in my thoughts, until the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon. The sky was painted with soft pinks and oranges, a beautiful sight that contrasted sharply with the turmoil in my heart. It was a new day, and with it came the realization that I had to face the future, however uncertain it might be. I made my way back to the suite, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. But when I opened the door, the room was empty. Emma was gone, her suitcase missing from the corner where she had left it. She had packed up and left without a word, without saying goodbye. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for what could have been, but it was quickly overshadowed by relief. She had made it easy for me, walking out of my life without a fight. There would be no drawn-out arguments, no more tears, just a clean break, exactly what I needed. I packed my own bags, the process mechanical, devoid of the emotion that had overwhelmed me just hours before. I booked an earlier flight home, wanting to get as far away from this place as possible. The resort, once a symbol of our love, now felt like a prison, a place that held only pain and betrayal. As I left the room, I took one last look around, the memories of what had happened here already beginning to fade. This chapter of my life was over. There was no point in holding on to the past, no point in dwelling on what had been lost. The road ahead would be difficult, I knew that. But for the first time since the night began, I felt a glimmer of hope. I would survive this. I would move on, rebuild, and find happiness again. Emma's betrayal had destroyed our marriage, but it hadn't destroyed me. As I walked out of the resort and into the bright morning light, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm had passed, and now it was time to start anew. The flight back home was a stark contrast to the one that had brought us to the Caribbean. I was alone, the seat beside me empty, a constant reminder of the gaping void Emma had left in my life. I spent the entire journey staring out of the window, watching the clouds drift by, lost in my thoughts. The events of the past few days replayed over and over in my mind, each memory tinged with bitterness and regret. But there was also a growing sense of resolve. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. The divorce was inevitable, and as painful as it was the only way forward. Emma had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. When I landed, the city greeted me with its usual bustle, the noise and energy a jarring contrast to the quiet, reflective mood I was in. I grabbed my luggage and made my way to the parking lot, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness as I drove away from the airport. This was home, but it no longer felt like it. Everything here was tied to a life that no longer existed, a life that had been shattered by Emma's betrayal. As I pulled into the driveway of our house, no, my house now, I noticed that the lawn was overgrown, a few weeds poking through the cracks in the pavement. It was a small detail, one I would have usually ignored, but today it seemed like a fitting metaphor for the state of my life. Things had been left untended, allowed to fall into disrepair, and now I was the one left to clean up the mess. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the front door. It felt strange to be back, to see the familiar surroundings that had once brought me comfort. But as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, the emptiness of the house hit me like a punch to the gut. Emma's presence was everywhere, in the photos on the walls, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air, the little touches she had added to make this place feel like home. I stood in the hallway, the silence pressing down on me, and for the first time since I left the resort, I allowed myself to grieve. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my marriage, I was mourning the life I had thought we would have, the future we had planned together. All of it was gone now, reduced to memories and broken promises. But the grief didn't last long. It couldn't. I had too much to do, too much to focus on if I wanted to move forward. The first step was to get in touch with a lawyer, to start the process of legally ending what Emma had destroyed. I had no doubt she would agree to a divorce. She had already walked out of my life without looking back. I made a few calls, setting up an appointment with a well-regarded divorce attorney in the city. The process was daunting, the paperwork overwhelming, but I forced myself to push through. This was what needed to be done, and I wasn't going to let my emotions get in the way. Over the next few days, I threw myself into the task of dismantling the life Emma and I had built together. I went through our belongings, packing up her things and setting them aside. The house, once filled with warmth and love, now felt like a mausoleum, a place haunted by the ghost of what could have been. But it also gave me a sense of closure. With each box I packed, each item I put away, I felt a little more in control, a little more like myself again. The hardest part was going through the photos, images of us smiling, happy, completely unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. I debated whether to keep them, but in the end, I decided to put them all in a box and store it away. I couldn't bring myself to destroy them, not yet. Maybe one day, when the pain wasn't so raw, I'd be able to look at them without feeling like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. As the days passed, I found a strange sense of peace in the routine. I went back to work, grateful for the distraction it provided. My colleagues were sympathetic when they found out about the divorce, offering words of comfort that I appreciated but didn't dwell on. I wasn't ready to talk about it, not with them, not with anyone. I needed time to process everything, to come to terms with what had happened. I also began to reach out to old friends, people I had lost touch with during my marriage. They were surprised to hear from me, but they welcomed me back into their lives without hesitation. It felt good to reconnect, to remember that I still had people who cared about me, who were there for me, even when everything else had fallen apart. And then there was the house. It was too big for just me, too full of memories that I couldn't bear to face every day. I started to think about selling it, finding a smaller place where I could start fresh. It was a daunting thought, but it also felt like the right thing to do. This house had been a symbol of our life together, and now that life was over. I needed a new beginning, a place where I could rebuild, away from the shadows of my past. As I packed away the last of Emma's things, I realized that I was finally starting to heal. The pain was still there, but it was no longer all-consuming. I was learning to live with it, to move forward despite it. Emma had broken my heart, but she hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, and I was determined to make the most of the life I had left. It was time to let go, to close this chapter, and start a new one. Just as I was beginning to settle into my new routine, life decided to throw me a curveball. It had been a few weeks since I returned home, and the divorce proceedings were moving along smoothly. Emma had been cooperative, more so than I expected, and we had agreed on most of the terms without much fuss. It seemed like we were both eager to put this chapter behind us. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find a letter in the mail. It was from Emma. My heart skipped a beat as I tore open the envelope, unsure of what to expect. We hadn't spoken much since that night at the resort, communicating only through our lawyers. So why was she reaching out now? The letter was short, but its contents left me reeling. Emma wrote that she had been thinking about everything that had happened, about how she had hurt me and destroyed our marriage. She admitted that she had made a terrible mistake, that she had been swept up in a moment of weakness and lost sight of what truly mattered. She said she didn't expect me to forgive her, but she wanted me to know that she was truly sorry for what she had done. But that wasn't the part that shocked me. The real bombshell came in the final paragraph. Emma confessed that she was pregnant. I read the words over and over, my mind struggling to process them. Pregnant. Emma was pregnant. She didn't say how far along she was or whether the child was mine or Mark's. All she wrote was that she had found out after we returned from the resort, and that she was keeping the baby. She said she understood if I wanted nothing to do with her or the child, but she felt I deserved to know the truth. I dropped the letter, my hands trembling. This changed everything. Just when I thought I was beginning to heal, to move on, Emma had pulled me back into the chaos. If the child was mine, what did that mean for us? Could I ever forgive her, not just for the betrayal, but for the child that now linked us together in a way I hadn't anticipated? And if the child wasn't mine, what then? The thought made me feel sick. The idea of Emma raising another man's child, a child conceived during the affair that had destroyed our marriage, was almost too much to bear. But I couldn't just ignore it. I needed answers. I needed to know where I stood. I called my lawyer the next morning, telling him about the letter. He was as surprised as I was, but he quickly shifted into professional mode, advising me to request a paternity test as soon as possible. It was the only way to know for sure, to determine what my next steps should be. He also suggested that we temporarily halt the divorce proceedings until we had more information. I agreed, though the thought of dragging this out any longer filled me with dread. A few days later, I met with Emma. It was the first time we had seen each other since that night at the resort, and the tension between us was palpable. She looked different, more fragile, more subdued than I remembered. Gone was the confident woman who had once been the center of my world, replaced by someone who seemed as lost as I felt. We met at a small cafe, a neutral place where we could talk without the weight of our shared history bearing down on us. I could see the nervousness in her eyes as she sat across from me, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her napkin. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the silence between us thick and heavy. Finally, I broke the silence. "Is it mine?" I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded slowly. "I don't know for sure," she admitted, her voice shaky. "But there's a chance it could be yours, David. I don't know what to do." The uncertainty in her voice, the raw vulnerability, made it impossible for me to hate her in that moment. I had been so angry, so full of rage, but seeing her like this, broken and scared, reminded me of the woman I had once loved. And despite everything, a part of me still cared about her, still wanted to protect her, even if it was just from the mess she had created. "We'll do a paternity test," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to know for sure." She nodded, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. "I'm sorry, David," she whispered. "I'm so sorry for everything." I wanted to respond, to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much she had destroyed, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just nodded, knowing that nothing I said would change what had happened. The only thing that mattered now was finding out the truth. The days leading up to the paternity test were some of the longest of my life. I was a bundle of nerves, unable to focus on anything but the impending results. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into work, reconnecting with friends, anything to keep my mind off what might happen. But no matter how hard I tried, the uncertainty gnawed at me, a constant presence in the back of my mind. Finally, the day came. We met at the clinic, the tension between us thicker than ever. The test itself was quick, clinical, but the implications were anything but. As we left the clinic, Emma turned to me, her eyes filled with fear and hope. "Whatever happens, David, I want you to know that I'll accept whatever decision you make." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just nodded and walked away, leaving her standing there alone. The waiting was excruciating. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would leap into my throat, only to be met with disappointment when it wasn't the call I was waiting for. The days dragged on, each one blending into the next, until finally, the call came. I sat in my car, parked outside my office, as I answered the phone. My lawyer's voice was calm, professional, but I could hear the tension beneath it. "David, I have the results," he said. There was a pause, a long, agonizing pause before he continued. "The child is not yours." Relief and devastation hit me at the same time, a confusing mix of emotions that left me breathless. On one hand, I was relieved. This child, this tangible reminder of Emma's betrayal, wasn't mine. I was free from that responsibility, free to move on without the burden of raising another man's child. But on the other hand, the finality of it all, the confirmation that our marriage had truly been a lie, crushed me in a way I hadn't expected. Emma's voice echoed in my mind, her pleas for forgiveness, her tears as she begged me to understand. But there was no understanding to be found, no forgiveness that could bridge the chasm between us. This was it, the end of the road. I thanked my lawyer, hung up the phone, and sat there in silence, the weight of the news settling over me like a heavy blanket. There was no going back now. The divorce would go through, our lives would separate, and I would be left to pick up the pieces. But as I sat there, I realized that this was also a new beginning. Emma's betrayal had shattered our marriage, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still standing, still capable of moving forward, of finding happiness again. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. I started the car and drove home, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the city. It was time to close this chapter for good, to leave the past behind and embrace whatever the future held. I didn't know what that future would look like, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to face it, whatever it might bring. The finalization of the divorce came swiftly after the paternity results. It was a quiet end, almost anticlimactic, considering the storm of emotions that had led up to it. There were no heated arguments, no drawn-out battles over assets or memories. Emma and I both seemed to understand that we were beyond fighting. All that was left was to sign the papers and close the book on what we had once shared. The day the divorce was finalized, I found myself alone in the house that had once been our home. It was an odd feeling, both freeing and unbearably sad. This place, filled with echoes of laughter, arguments, and love, now stood as a testament to a chapter of my life that was over. I had already started the process of selling the house, knowing I needed a fresh start in a place untainted by the memories of betrayal. I walked through each room one last time, saying my silent goodbyes. The photos were gone, the closets empty, and yet the presence of what had once been lingered in the air. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. It was time to move on. The real estate agent had assured me that the house would sell quickly. Its location and charm made it desirable despite the circumstances. I was ready to leave it behind, ready to start anew in a place where I could rebuild my life without the weight of the past holding me down. In the days that followed, I threw myself into finding a new place to live. I wanted something different, something that didn't remind me of what I had lost. I found a small modern apartment in the heart of the city, nothing extravagant, but perfect for the fresh start I needed. The move was a whirlwind, but as I settled into my new space, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The apartment was minimalistic, a blank slate that I could shape into something that reflected who I was now, not who I had been with Emma. I hung up new art, bought new furniture, and slowly began to carve out a space that felt like mine. It was a process, a form of therapy in its own right, as I let go of the old and embraced the new. I also made an effort to reconnect with the world outside my past. I reached out to friends I had lost touch with, accepting their invitations to dinners, drinks, and weekend getaways. I realized how much I had isolated myself during my marriage, how much I had let my life revolve around Emma. Rebuilding those connections brought a sense of belonging, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this world. One evening, a few months after the divorce was finalized, I found myself at a rooftop bar with a group of friends. The city lights twinkled below us, the air filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation. I sipped my drink, feeling a contentment I hadn't expected to find so soon after everything that had happened. As the night wore on, I noticed a woman sitting alone at the bar, her face partially obscured by a cascade of dark hair. She seemed deep in thought, a small smile playing on her lips as she swirled her drink in its glass. There was something about her, a quiet confidence, a sense of self-assuredness that drew me in. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to open myself up to someone new. The wounds from Emma's betrayal were still fresh, the scars still tender. But something in me urged me forward, a small voice whispering that it was time to take a step into the unknown. I approached her, offering a friendly smile as I sat down beside her. "Mind if I join you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my chest. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine with a warmth that immediately put me at ease. "Not at all," she replied, her smile widening. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing at the same time. There was an ease between us, a connection that felt natural and unforced. It was nothing like what I had shared with Emma. This was different, new, untainted by the past. For the first time since the divorce, I felt a flicker of something I had thought I'd lost forever: hope. As the night drew to a close, I walked her to her car, our conversation still flowing easily. She gave me her number, and I found myself smiling as I slipped the piece of paper into my pocket. There was no rush, no pressure, just the possibility of something new, something unburdened by the weight of betrayal. When I returned to my apartment that night, I sat on the balcony, looking out over the city. The events of the past year had changed me, reshaped me in ways I was only beginning to understand. But I was still here, still standing, and for the first time in a long while, I was looking forward to what the future might hold. Emma's betrayal had been the end of one chapter, but it wasn't the end of my story. I had learned that I could survive heartbreak, that I could rebuild my life from the ground up. And as I sat there, the cool night air brushing against my skin, I realized that I was ready to close the door on the past and step forward into the future, whatever it might bring. This was my new beginning,